I'm Charlie Gaskins, emeritus faculty from the Animal Science Department. I'm not Laura Hill.
We kind of knew that.
We're missing her, but anyway, I'm going to stand in for her today. So welcome to this year's WSU Emerita Emeritus Society Legacy of Excellence lecture. This afternoon's lecture is an important part of Showcase Week, which is a wonderful system celebration of the accomplishments of our faculty, staff, and students. I got to skip this next part. I am honored to introduce today's presenter, Dr. Nicholas Lovrich, albeit my brief introduction will not be able to successfully convey the tremendous impact that he has had on WSU, Washington, and the university, and the nation, and I believe that. Dr. Lovrich served as the director of the Division of Governmental Studies and Services from 1977 to 2010. I came in 76, by the way. And retired to emeritus status in 2011. He holds the rank of Regents Professor Emeritus in the School of Politics, Philosophy, and Public Affairs, and the honor of being the Claudius O. and Mary W. Johnson Distinguished Professor in Political Science. All great. He remains active in scholarship as an affiliate researcher in both the Department of Political Science at the University of Utah and in the Department of Criminal Justice and Criminology at WSU, and recently joined the advisory board for the William D. Ruckelshaus Center. Dr. Lovrich was on the faculty at DePaul University, University of Denver, and Metropolitan State in Denver. And by the way, he was born in California, and he went to Stanford, got his bachelor's degree there, and then he went to UCLA for his PhD, maybe master's as well. I'll look that up. I don't think that's here. He is the author or co-author, co-editor of 13 books and more than 200 peer-reviewed articles in journals of political science, public administration, and criminal justice. Dr. Lovrich served as the chair of 30 WSU PhD dissertation committees during his academic career. He served as the WSU Faculty Senate legislative representative to 10 legislative sessions in Olympia and was a leader in the creation of the WSU Center for Environmental Research, Education, and Outreach. Dr. Lovrich was on partial appointment in WSU Extension as a local government specialist for over 20 years. He worked with WSU Presidents Terrell, Smith, and Floyd in building the foundations for WSU campuses in Spokane, Vancouver, and the Tri-Cities. He served as the interim chancellor of WSU Spokane from 2004 through 2005. Dr. Lovrich remains active in his retirement as a collaborator on grant-funded research projects and peer-reviewed publications with a number of former doctoral students in both political science and criminal justice criminology. So I got to know Dr. Lovrich best because he loves to fish. And we made a couple of trips to a fishing camp way up in northern Saskatchewan, which takes 3 days to drive to. So you get to know a person pretty good when you spend a little time in the car and also at the fishing lodge. But we had a great time, caught a lot of fish, right? Nick is truly amazing human being, and we are fortunate to have him, to have his contributions to WSU. Please join me in welcoming this year's Emeritus Society Legacy of Excellence lecturer. Nick?
Most of this talk was prepared by Dr. Stephen Steer. He's been giving a similar talk for Washington Humanities series across the state for a couple, 3, 4 years now, I think. Yeah, maybe even longer. And we've been doing research together for a very, very long time. And so this is an example of what we talk about when we go into various places. The last place we gave this talk was at the the annual convention of the League of Women Voters of Washington. And they wanted to know about what kind of research we're doing apart from the work we are doing with them as an organization. So I want to pay special thanks to Linnell Hott, the president of the League, Dr. Hott, and I want to thank Stephen for most of the content. I want to thank Francis Benjamin for all the analysis that lies behind this presentation, and Dr. Bob Boatwright. He's with the National Institute for Civil Discourse and their research director, and he funded the research I'm going to talk about. I also have to thank Sam Reed and Kim Wyman. These are remarkable public servants. They were secretaries of state in Washington. Sam spent, he was there for 3 terms. He spent his early youth at WSU and has a master's degree in political science from our department. And Kim was his successor and mentee, both of them Republicans of the type that there aren't very many left of, that believe in democracy and fair elections and expanding the electorate. So Kim Wyman is no longer the Secretary of State. She resigned and she joined the Biden administration, and she registered as an independent and lives in Washington, D.C. Her last months in office here were very difficult ones because she went to Georgia and supported the people fighting against Trump's invasion of their electoral process, and said, I want to back up the Secretary of State of Georgia and their system. And then she had death threats. The State Patrol had to do a 24-hour protective service around her home. It was disgusting. But we want to thank both of them for opening up the doors, Francis and I in particular, opening up the doors for doing research in the state of Washington. And our research here into civil discourse stimulated a lot of interest in other states, and we've had to replicate the work we did here in several other states, and I'll talk about that. So this is the kind of feeling that we're talking about. We all sense that something is really profoundly broken about political discourse in our country at this time. And I think Ruth Bader Ginsburg says it best, and can't we just get back to what we know is normal? And Uncle Sam is very sad, and people are in each other's faces. And this is particularly hard for us in Washington because we lived with the legacy of Tom Foley. And Tom Foley was the epitome of civil discourse. He represented a conservative district in eastern Washington as a Democrat. He bridged many different gaps in our political process as chair of the Agriculture Department in his time, committee in Congress, and he became the Speaker of the House. And I want you to take note of the fact that there will be a book published coming out in July by the University of Kansas Press by Kenton Bird and John Pierce. It's a political biography of Speaker Foley. I think it's a great book. I'm going to hawk 2 books today, that book and our own book. But we are used to this politics of civil discourse, and it's particularly difficult coming from Washington, where we are a state that prides itself in ability to come to agreement, that we don't have a better political environment in which to cast our votes and learn about public affairs. This is Tom's quote. I really like this of all the things he said. In a cynical age, I still believe that we must summon people to a vision of public service. For in the end, this ethic determines more than anything else whether we will have citizens and leaders of honor, judgment, wisdom, and heart. It's really easy to be turned off by politics today, to become cynical, and to kind of just give up. But we can't. Too much is at stake. We want people of good character and judgment to be anxious to serve in the public service, as elected officials, as appointed officials, as police and fire and first responders, teachers, nurses. We need people that have this dedication to serving others, and our form of democracy depends on it. We can't live without it. Is it just academics who are concerned about this? Not really. When you do public opinion polling, I'm not going to dwell on the content of the slides because they only gave me 45 minutes. I'm used to talking for 90 without taking a breath, so this is really hard. People generally, when you do this survey over and over again, they're concerned that something is really wrong. And one of the things that we have to realize is that this isn't the first time our country has experienced this kind of political dislocation and alienation and polarization. And Tocqueville wrote about this. One essential feature of democratic government is civil discourse, being able to disagree agreeably. And Tocqueville said, I don't know where it came from exactly, but most historians would agree that our founding fathers, many of them were lawyers and were accustomed to the courtroom setting. And a courtroom cannot function unless people are respectful in one another, even when they disagree violently about facts and the law and everything else under the sun. So we've had periods when we've had a caning in the House of Representatives and a pistol drawn and fist fights, and we've had horrible mistreatment of immigrants and the KKK and all of these deeply felt issues that brought even violent confrontation to American politics. That's not new. We've had that before. And during the Vietnam War, my period, and Martin Luther King, we have to remember the 60s. It wasn't that long ago for me. Now, for my students, last time I taught, they didn't even know what I was talking about, but I think this audience will know. So we know that this is not the first time we've had politics like this. Better minds than mine have put this together into graphic form with historical documentation, and Stephen knows this literature much better than I do, so I'm borrowing from Stephen. But we've had these prolonged periods of discourse, and here's where we are now. We're going up the trail of serious stress in the political system. Maybe one of the worst parts of it is that if you dig deeper into public opinion and you ask Democrats what they think of Republicans, and you ask Republicans, what do you think of Democrats? The things they say reflect a contempt for the people with whom they disagree. It's not that we just disagree on some public policy issues. It's that they're bad people. They don't think well. Their intentions are not the best. And that's really a serious problem when you're talking about bridging differences is one thing you can compromise on policy. Contempt, you can't really compromise. You either win or lose. That's really sad. It's so bad, and it's doing so much damage to our institutions beyond the immediate political spectacle that we get to see every day. This is the newspaper from Fort Lewis. And it says, no longer are you going to be watching CNN and Fox News and because these programs are not about news, they're about mobilizing different political persuasions, and we're not going to let you have that on our base. This is not just Fort Lewis, this is the Army and the Navy. And unfortunately, much of our police are divided in the same way. This picture showed up on Facebook. And it's Helen DeGeneres and President Bush enjoying a Cowboys football game. So the reaction of people seeing this picture on Facebook was not, isn't that nice that Democrats and Republicans can share a football game together? It was just the opposite. How can she sit there with that son of a bitch? How can he entertain this gay woman, at a football game? Well, this is just despicable. So people that study Facebook and study social media, analyze the amount of public approval and amount of public disapproval, and the disapproval was off the charts. One of my friends, longtime friend, Gary Moncrief, and you'll hear more about Gary in a minute, he took this picture of this muffler shop or something in Boise. And we gave a talk on findings for the state of Idaho from our research. And he's a professor at WSU. And he said, Nick, I have a picture for you for your presentation. You really need this picture. And it's about people feeling that we need to fix this, especially if you're in business. And half of your business people in Boise are Democrats and half are Republicans. What are you going to do? Have them come on alternate days? That's not going to work. There's a wonderful institution at Gettysburg, the Gettysburg Foundation. It exists to celebrate Abraham Lincoln and the Gettysburg Address and the battlefield site, and they're connected to the National Park System. And their board decided that they need to get active in a new area. And that is, they need to go to communities where the bridging is necessary, the healing needs to happen. Communities divided by partisan polarization. And they went to visit one town that John Pierce and I and Chris Simon studied for a book on immigration politics, Hazleton, Pennsylvania, where Trump's arguments about Mexicans and coming across the border and all that really started with the passage of an immigrant exclusion ordinance in Hazleton, Pennsylvania. So that's why we were studying that town. They went to Hazleton to try to bridge the differences between pro-immigrant welcoming people and people who don't want to have Latinos move there. These are mainly Latinos that came from New York after the towers, and it was very sad. But anyway, this divisiveness, this polarization, this contempt for the other side, it's present in almost all of our institutions. Maybe the most troublesome are churches. We're already losing church-going population at a very fast clip, and in many denominations, they've just given up on trying to be all-inclusive and then become very conservative denominations or very liberal denominations. These organizations, the National Council of Churches, National Association of the Evangelicals, Presbyterian Church of the USA, Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, American Baptist Churches, Mormon Women for Ethical Government, and U.S. Conference of Bishops have all got together in 2019 and said, can we do something so that we can remind people who are congregants in a church that there should be Christians first and Democrats and Republicans second, not the other way around. So if you talk to, Catherine is from Salt Lake City and has lots of Mormon relatives, they argue and observe that you go to a ward meeting and the Democrats sit on one side and the Republicans sit on the other side. It's not like it used to be. People come in and love each other and rejoice in being members of the LDS churches, and now that you pick sides. You're a Romney Republican or a Lee Republican. This is easy to talk about, that we should all get along. But it's not that simple. And Martin Luther King reminded us from the Birmingham jail that in some periods of time, you need to be upset. You need to be active. You need to use your voice. And so it's not a simple matter to say that everything should return to civil discourse. This is a time when a contempt is present, when there's a lot of contemptuous behavior that should be called out. And so it's not a simple bromide that is needed. It's a much deeper problem that has to be addressed. So what happens when politics goes astray like this? You get something political scientists call gridlock. That is, you get institutions that are unable to translate the public will into public policy. So for example, this figure, 70%, that's very solid and steady for a long time. It might even be higher. 7 out of 10 Americans think we should legalize the presence and establish a pathway to citizenship for dreamers. Why doesn't that happen? Why can't Congress act, even when there's an overwhelming consensus on, that's a big consensus for any public policy issue. If we look at guns, we had another mass shooting just this week. How can we not do more? We've passed a feeble little bipartisan bill. That's about all we've been able to do. So we can't translate that into public policy. If we look at public opinion on is is global warming happening, or did we all make it up, and so on, people are beginning to understand some of the science, irrefutable evidence of a problem that we must act on pretty quickly. But we really can't pass major legislation out of Congress right now in any field. Actually, the states are doing more about global climate change than the federal government. So, is this same thing, inability to get things done, happening in our state legislatures, or is it just Congress? Congress is dysfunctional, but we have 50 state legislatures. We have elections, we have Democrats, we have Republicans, we have all kinds of people. Are the state legislatures doing all right? So there was a study done by the National Conference of State Legislatures, and they studied state legislators themselves. They surveyed state legislators, a large number of them, 1,600 of them, from all 50 states. And they came up with some conclusions, and I'll go into those in the next slide. And then we did a study on the same question of how are the state legislatures working under these conditions in 2018 and 2019. And we decided to study not the state legislators, but the legislative lobbyists who work in the state legislatures, whose job it is to get things done, to move bills through, to amend bills, to kill things. They really know. I used to be one, and I know a lot of these people. They really know what's going on. A lot of times more than the legislators who get elected and fumble around, they can't even find their way around Olympia. They know a lot. So we went to them and said, what do you think? What do you think is going on in your state legislature? So the first study done in 2015 and 2016, there was a prevailing view that is not as bad as it looks. I know it looks horrible, but this too will pass. It's Trump. And he's an oddball, and he's an outlier, and he's destabilizing, but we'll get back to normal politics. And the states are not like Congress. The states are much better. They have to have a budget every year, and they can't go into huge deficit spending, and there's a lot of reasons why this isn't as bad as it looks. So that was the general takeaway, and the commentary from the state legislators is that just give it a little time, this too will pass. Well, we decided it doesn't seem to be passing. When Francis and I were in Olympia, and he was the president of the Association of Washington Cities, and he was lobbying for cities, and I was lobbying for WSU Faculty Senate, Sam Reed called us into his office. And he said, Francis, Nick, why don't you study something important? I said, well, pardon me all the hell, Sam, but, we got 13 books and 200 articles. What are you talking about? He says, no, study something really important. Like what? He says, this problem of lack of ability to reason across the aisle, lack of ability to come to compromise, it's essential to how a state legislature works and state government work. We're losing that. So as the only statewide Republican office holder, Sam Reed says, my take on doing elections in Washington is not an R or a D thing. I think it needs to be done in a nonpartisan way. I also think the Secretary of State ought to provide good offices when legislators can't come to agreement and bring in people to hash out an agreement. And so I've taken that role, and I've been very successful at it until recent years, when it's becoming harder and harder to bring parties together. Harder and harder to find Republicans and Democrats who trust their leaders to go negotiate something without them being there. And then sometimes it's even hard to be in the same room with people from the other side because the public is watching what you're doing. It's like George Bush having Helen DeGeneres come and enjoy a football game. So we said, okay, Sam, for us to do that, we need your help. We need to do a survey of the key actors in this process. Legislators, people who have served in the legislature for the last 20 years, people on the legislative staff. There are career people, and then there are partisan people in the caucuses. And we want to study interns who worked in the legislature as students and went on to life, and 20 years later, what do they think about what's going on? Almost everybody who does a legislative internship in Olympia ends up a junkie, a policy junkie. They watch and they listen. Many of them go into public service after that. And we collected this data, shared it with the state legislatures, all 4 caucuses, and gave presentations in Seattle and Spokane about our findings. And And the sentiment was there is something really different. The dynamics of how legislators used to create relationships among themselves and between each other, that's going away. And there's less and less capacity to find people who are in the moderate middle. Most of the people are sorting to the extremes on either side, Democrat and Republican. So we, just two of us, we're busy, we're working, we have full-time jobs. How can we do a study on a bigger scale? And so we asked the Holy Institute and people at the National Institute for Civil Discourse and DGSS and whoever we could find to give us a little bit of money and support and time, and let's field the study. The study was to be a presentation at a conference. There is an annual presentation on state policy and politics in San Diego at the University of San Diego, University of California, San Diego. And everybody who studies legislative politics comes to that. And we said, okay, let's report there on data that we collect from lobbyists all over the country, over 1,000 lobbyists. And we can have some papers, and we'll have Sam Reed come and introduce the panel. And we'll have a special forum at that conference. It was all set up. Everything was great until COVID. And then we get an urgent message from San Diego County Public Health and say, we are a hotspot. Nobody's coming here. No one, don't get on an airplane. Don't come here. We're locking all the doors. And so then what? Here we got half a dozen people all recruited to this project, including John Pierce at Kansas and so on, and no conference to go to. So WSU Press said, well, why don't you enhance the book a bit and add some more dimensions to it, and we'll publish it. So this book is available for purchase. If you don't want to buy it, I'll give you one. Just let me know if you're interested in having it. It's a really good testimony. We dedicated the book to Marty Mullen, because Marty would have loved to be involved in this if she was still with us. So all these people from across the country, a lot of them are PhDs from WSU Political Science. And so when Papa Lovrich gets on the phone and says, hey, are you interested in this study? They probably weren't interested, but they can't say no. So I said, okay, this is what we need from you. We need to know who are the most respected and experienced state legislative lobbyists in your state. And they come in many varieties, but there are lobby firms, there are people who are individual entrepreneurs as lobbyists, and then there are people who are legislative affairs officers or liaison officers for public agencies, and then there are a lot of nonprofit organizations that have lobbyists as well. Some of them are compensated, some are volunteer. So we needed some of all of those. So we had these states where we had a colleague taking part in the study: Arkansas, Kansas, Idaho, Utah, California, Nevada, Illinois, Iowa, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Oregon, and North Carolina. They all said, I'll take part, we'll take part, if you'll come to our state when you're done, and you analyze our data, and you compare what we look like compared to the rest of the country and our neighboring states. So we made that deal. Okay, fine. You help us gather the data, and then we will come and make a presentation. So until COVID made it really impossible, we did presentations in Arkansas, in Nevada, in Oregon, in Utah, Idaho, Texas. It's not on there, but we did Texas as well. And I can't remember, and North Carolina at Duke. This is what the map looks like. when you get all of these survey results and you analyze them by state and you ask questions like, you know, is this a problem in your state legislature? Is the space of nonpartisan policy making shrinking so that more things are politicized, partisan than in the past? Questions like that. And on the quality of legislative deliberations, you can put all that information together and create a scale for each state, summarizing all of the findings for each state. We had about 25 respondents per state on the average. Some states had more. And here's what you end up with. There are definitely differences in the degree to which these darker ones are places that report we're still able to converse across party lines and across divisions within majority caucuses and minority caucuses. But in parts of the country, you know, they don't even try, kind of given up on it. So we want to explore more fully than we did in the book what accounts for the states that are the 10 most civil states. Why are they that way? And the 10 least civil states, why are they like that? Some of them are very different, very interesting. For example, Oregon and Washington are in very different categories, but we're right next to each other. What is it that makes it so much more difficult for Oregon to reason through the politics that obtain at this time? Likewise, up here, Maine and Vermont, very different states. One's in the top 10, one's in the bottom 10. We have another interesting contrast in North Carolina and South Carolina. North Carolina's state legislature blew up. They couldn't even meet. It's like legislative quorums can't be made if people don't show up, and so people decide they don't want to show up. So that's our next challenge, is to do a paper, and Stephen's on the paper, he had to leave, on what can we learn from looking in depth at the 10 highest states and the 10 lowest states to see if we have some common configurations that explain the difference. So this is typically how we would do a presentation. We would show people the findings for their state. We would show what state was the highest and what state was the lowest, and then we'd invite them to ask questions about findings. And we would do this table and this table, something like this. Is this happening? Are norms breaking down in your state? Are there more or less nonpartisan areas and so on? And then we had the benefit of a lot of comments. Legislators are of all varieties. Legislative lobbyists are much more uniform in the fact that they tend to have advanced degrees. Most of them are lawyers. And so they love to write. And they love to tell you why they have the opinions they have. And they write volumes. And Francis remembers looking at these things, say, we have to transcribe all of this, and we have to code all of this. And Francis, it's gold. Yeah, but it's like 1 million hours. You know, how are we going to pay for this? So I stole some money from Catherine that she doesn't know about, and we paid people to do this coding for us. I guess you probably did find out about it. In our state, the interest in civil discourse has passed from the Secretary of State's office, where there's polite interest, but not genuine interest, to the Lieutenant Governor's office. So Denny Heck was a long-time Washington politician, and Booth Gardner, Chief of Staff, and he served in Congress for the last 3 terms, came back and is now the Lieutenant Governor. And he said, I want to make this one of my important goals, is to promote civil discourse. And he had this group assembled. This is Linnell Hott, who's the president of the League of Women Voters. She invited me to come along with her to this conclave of people interested in this topic. Hey, Nathan. And this is a state legislator, state senator, and she's from University of Washington. We don't sit close together whenever we're University of Washington people. And somebody asked him, why are you motivated to make this your thing? And he says, because I remember Washington, the Tom Foley Washington. I remember how much you could accomplish when people shared this idea that people of good faith could differ, but they must come together for the sake of the country or the nation and people. And I want to get back to that. I think we can get back to that. And I think I can use my good office to help that happen. But I need people that have the research background and have the boots on the ground, working with groups to help me in that process. So we plan to continue to work in this area. We're going to do a replication of the study we did in 2018 and 19. We'll start out in May, and we'll try to collect as many new observations. The comments we've had on our public presentations have been really revealing. One comment was COVID has made this a much bigger challenge. You say, well, what do you mean? We started meeting remotely, Zoom and that kind of thing. We invested in the infrastructure, and it takes quite a bit of money to get there and training and how we're going to use it. And now many people are addicted to it. They don't want to come and meet face to face. They don't want to get to know each other. They just want to do the hour meeting and vote and get the hell out of town or whatever it is. And that you better study this question, because it's not the same state legislature you were studying when you first started your research. You say, oh, that's great. One more complication we need to handle. So we're going to do that. There's a kind of consensus, and I think Stephen would back me up on this, that ultimately this won't get any better unless people vote for people that espouse this idea of civil discourse among people who disagree. No amount of work really is going to be as effective as citizens demanding that somebody who's running for public office articulate this point of view about American democracy.
Whether you vote by mail or in person, we will fully support the results of the upcoming presidential election, regardless of the outcome.
Although we sit on different sides of the aisle, we are both committed to American civility and a peaceful transition of power.
The two leading candidates for Utah governor are coming together with a message of civility.
This new PSA is being released on the same day early voting gets underway here in Utah. We have team coverage from our new specialist on Decision 2020. Jed Bull is tracking early voting in what officials say could be a historic election.
We start with Ladd Egan on that call for civility come Election Day. Ladd?
Yeah, the joint message from Lieutenant Governor Spencer Cox and his Democratic challenger Chris Peterson is that Utah can set an example for the rest of the country.
I'm Chris Peterson.
And I'm Spencer Cox.
Political opponents running against each other for Utah governor agreeing on this.
We can debate issues without degrading each other's character.
We can disagree without hating each other.
The series of joint public service announcements call for a return to civility.
So let's show the country that there's a better way.
In an interview with KSL, the candidate said the idea for the ads came together quickly because of the important message.
We have to start treating each other with kindness. And I realize that that's not a particularly original or unique message. And the fact that it's resonating, I think, shows us how far down the wrong path we've already gone in our country.
We should have debate, we should protest, we should disagree vehemently, but we don't have to degrade each other, and we can actually solve problems working together.
It's a little bit of a light in the middle of a dark political storm.
Hinckley Institute of Politics Director Jason Perry says the ads are refreshing and show the Utah way of doing politics.
Is the kind of thing that you can do when a race is not completely close.
But to not expect such an approach in a hotly contested race like the 4th congressional district that's full of national money and negative ads. There are a total of 3 public service announcements as part of this ad campaign. They're being shared online, also on social media, and on local television stations, including right here on KSL. And Dave, this definitely isn't something you see every day in politics. Great to see those on different sides of the aisle coming together like this.
Well, our moms have taught us for years to play nice. This is a good reminder. Ladd Egan live for us tonight. Thanks, Ladd.
Okay, so why Utah? If you go back to that picture of the 50 states, Utah's the 2nd highest in civility. Utah also has a big majority Mormon population. And this division, more between moderate Republicans and Trump Republicans, is tearing their state apart, their local politics, school boards, all of those things. They really are concerned. Maybe because if you know what it looks like and you're losing it, you get motivated to do something about it. So there's a very interesting project going on, also in Utah, supported by the business school at the University of Utah. And it is spearheaded by a woman named Tammy Pfeiffer. And she was a state legislator. She worked for Governor Cox in the Utah Department of Public Education, but has a public health focus, and during COVID. And she said, I watched how COVID first brought everyone together, and then it tore everybody apart. And we still haven't been able to get back together. She's was a member of the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, a great voice. They make all those people retire when they're 60 and make room for young blood. And she still volunteers for the choir. And she's a Republican, lifelong Republican. And she has 5 kids and 13 grandkids. The 5 kids came home for Thanksgiving. And they said they were never going to come again. And I said, what are you talking about? So she did a presentation for Sam Reed and he has a board, and Stephen and I were invited to participate. And she showed a picture of her family. Says, here's my kids. She's a Democratic Socialist. He's a Libertarian. He's a Trumper. He's a never Trumper. They're all over the place. And the one thing they agree upon, they don't want to be in the same room together anymore, in the same family. She says, we can't do that. We can't live. How did we prioritize politics over everything else in life? That's not healthy. So she had this idea. Why don't we score political communication, campaign material, speeches, and so on, in terms of dignity? Are you communicating in a contemptuous way about your opponent in the election, or are you according them dignity and identifying the things that you disagree on? And that it's possible to get 22 students from the University of Utah, from all over the political map, and have them agree at a alpha rate of 96%, 96.96, on what score should we give this communication, 1 to 8, from contemptuous to dignified. And then they ran those numbers out and said, what we want to do with this information is to let voters know. If you're tired of this kind of politics, don't vote for people who engage in it. Vote for people who communicate fairly. Well, Tammy's idea has caught fire. People at Stanford want to use AI to do coding of the speech so that you can get this information out. She's made several presentations to state League of Women Voter organizations saying, don't you think this would be interesting information to provide voters along with the voter pamphlet on how are people behaving in the public sphere of political discourse? So I think there's some reason why Utah is a hotbed for this activity and why Washington, we're also in the top 10, really cares about getting back to a politics of tomfoolery, if you will. And I want to thank you for coming and listening, and I want to give proper credit to my colleagues who did 99% of the work. And I want you to let me know if you need a copy of the book, and I'll get one to you. As long as you give it to someone who is going to promote civil discourse. Thank you. Any questions? We have a few minutes, but not much. Yes, Larry.
Yes, I'd like you to speak to this. I mean, I think about civil discourse and how to change it. And my own experience has been, you change the culture. And there's lots of ways you can change the culture. You address one through voting, and the other, is leadership. If somebody at the top says we just won't tolerate this, this is how things change. But going back to voting, I know you mentioned we should vote for people where civil discourse is important. I remember hearing a Foley lecture on rank-sum voting, where I can't remember the person's name who gave the talk, but he gave an example of San Francisco where they were doing rank-sum voting for mayor. Had a whole host of candidates, 6 or 7. And some of the candidates started to break off and campaign together. Their views were very much alike, and they say, well, okay, vote for me first and her second. And she would say, vote for him first, but, vote for me first. And, what's your opinion on rank-sum voting and getting the job?
It's really hard to change, but more and more people are moving to this. If we're going to have a moderate middle again, we need to change the structure of how voting happens. So on the one hand, there's districting and using districting commissions rather than gerrymandering all the districts so that you never get any real chance to change somebody in office. So these things are happening, but they're extremely difficult and slow. This problem is moving like a wildfire. It started with Trump, and it started with one branch of Republicans, and now it's a whole Republican Party. Now it's about school boards and public health districts. And I remember this wonderful lady got up on television in Idaho, and she's been the librarian for Boundary County for 18 years. And she said, I quit. The people that are on my board now have nothing to do with libraries or books or knowledge. They're just fighting politics. So Stephen had to leave, but Stephen is working on a project. We wanted to do a paper at the American Political Science Association meeting in September in LA on nationalization. To what degree has local politics? We have an old aphorism in American political science that all politics is local from Tip O'Neill, and that's the way it is. In fact, it's not. It's the opposite. Local politics are becoming all about anti-Trump or pro-Trump. It has nothing to do with the local issues at stake. It has to do with a broad idea about politics and society, and it has nothing to do with solving problems. I'm a public administration guy. I'm not a real political scientist. John Pierce would say, you're not a real political scientist. I study the agencies of public service. They can't work. They can't do Woodrow Wilson's magic public administration if the politics is broken. You have to depend upon the politics being somewhat healthy to be good at being a chief of the Washington State Patrol or any other agency that you're managing in the public interest. So I think it's going to be 10 years more of this wandering in the wilderness of acrimonious politics. But there are people out there all over the country sensing that we need to work on fixing this. We need to get past this. The people that are trying to do it are really bright voices, and they're working hard, and they're trying to get it right. Catherine and I went to our 55th Stanford reunion, and the president of the university gets to talk to rich donors and alumni coming back for 5 minutes or 8 minutes. And what did he choose to talk about? He said, we created the Door School of Sustainability. I'm very proud of that. Number 2, we have a required course of all freshmen at Stanford University, 1 credit. They must take part in discussions where they learn how to conduct civil discourse. They come from all majors, all different areas, but they need to learn how to talk together respectfully. Why are we doing that? That seems like kindergarten, but that's where we are. So I hope you enjoyed the talk, and I hope you'll drop by the bookstore and buy a book, or just drop me a note and I'll get one to you. Thank you.